So to first of all show you kind of what we're working with at the Times, the taxonomy team is very small. There's 3 full-time permanent employees. We've all been doing this for a very long time. Myself, I started at the New York Times at the index department, which I'll talk about in a little bit, in 2005 while I was going to library school at night. And then I joined taxonomy side of things in 2008. So we've been working on this a long, long time. And we also do have right now a full-time, you know, temporary person, but it's a small but mighty team. But we have a big legacy that we need to maintain. So first I want to take you through a little history of all the tagging at the Times and why we keep doing this and why we've, had such a great history of this. So I'm going to start with this journalistic issue. So say you want to write a retrospective on John Quincy Adams because it's the anniversary of his death and it's 1958. So where are you going to find all this research and where are you going to find past coverage of the Times on John Quincy Adams? Answer is, of course, metadata. You're going to use the metadata. And how would you do that back then? So back then, and from the beginning, basically, there was some sort of record of what everything in the Times was about. And so there was a description and also basically metadata assigned. So you'd have people and subjects and that sort of thing all assigned. So back in the day, it was handwritten and you would go look up, Adams, John Quincy, and that would lead you somewhere. So where would that lead you? And it's the morgue. Of course, it's not the kind of morgue you think it is. It's what we call the archive of the New York Times. The clippings and photo archive is called the morgue. So this is a nice shot of what it looked like in its original incarnation in the old building, or one of the old buildings. I think this is from the original Times building in Times Square. So here you see a bunch of employees who are dealing with these giant filing cabinets. And basically what the morgue employees did is they would literally cut out each article from the paper, put it on a card stock, and then assign metadata to it. So they would assign like the subject and the people and the organizations, all of that, and then they would file it in this specific system that was unique to the morgue away in these giant filing cabinets. Then when a reporter, say, was looking at John Quincy Adams, he would call down to the morgue and say, hey, can you give me everything on John Quincy Adams? So they would look him up in the card catalog and that information, all those clippings would then be delivered to the newsroom. So they were kind of your real-time research librarians resource. So this was, just an internal thing used in the newsroom for a very long time. And then in the 19 teens, it was decided that maybe we should share this metadata, this information with the world. Maybe this is a product people would be interested in. And so they started the New York Times Index. And you could see you could get it for $8 a year back in 1913. And so basically this became a huge hit with librarians, research institutes, universities, etc., that they, could use these books and look up things in the New York Times past archive by themselves. And as you can see, this example, what the book looked like, it did go from 1913 to 2017 was the last issue that we published. And basically, it would give you what you can see here, an abstract of what an article was about. It would tell you where that article could be found, and then it would tell you what subjects and people, etc., that article was about. And because of the popularity of this, we did get the nickname the paper of record. So that is where that comes from. But, when it tells you where the article is, the question is like, okay, then what? So originally it was a guide to the rag paper edition. So this is what it looked like. It was just bound on better paper that wouldn't disintegrate as quickly. And I should mention, sorry, I meant to mention, so it published from 1913 to 2017, but they actually went back retroactively and made books for 1851 on. So there is an index for all of those years, and they would be, like I said, the guide to reg paper. And then eventually there was an upgrade in technology and we got, microfilm, microfiche versions of the Times. So I don't know how many people on this call, I don't know what age bracket you are in, so I'll just explain a little just in case. I find that people younger than myself don't always know what this is. It's basically like film, and there's images of the pages of the paper, and you'd put it in this machine and you basically either push a button or crank it depending on your machine, and they go by. So say your abstract said this is on page 12, column 3, you would then scroll to page 12 and look at the third column and your article would be there for you. So that is um, kind of how metadata got started at times, and it became a big business, a big money maker. Universities and libraries were subscribing to the index. It gave us a really good reputation, and it was used internally to make good journalism and let us look at the past. So now we are looking at the present. So presently, we have a vocabulary called times tags. So this vocabulary was actually um, formed from the original index vocabulary. So in 2000, it was decided that, hey, we've been on this internet thing with this website creating digital content for the last 4 years. We should probably tag it with some sort of metadata. So it was decided that what they would do is they would digitize all of the terms that were in the original index vocabulary and start using those. So that was the basis of it. And from then on, we've been adding and deleting or refining from that vocabulary. And what we've ended up with right now is about a million, maybe over, of named entities. So people, places, organizations, and titles. And then around 4,500 or so, maybe closer to 5,000 subjects. So those are things like baseball, or it could be things like a mass shooting event that happened, or the presidential election of 2020, that sort of things. And those subjects all have relationships to each other. So they're, in a broad, narrow, related relationship with each other. And they all have specific scope notes for usage. So this metadata is assigned for all published assets. So it's things like articles, video slideshows, interactives. It is not currently used for things like individual photos or clips that then become videos. It would only be on the finished product. Um, and how we use these terms to get them to the newsroom, basically we use a rules-based software. So the taxonomy team writes rules uh, that look at the text. So we bounce those rules off the text and the newsroom gets back suggestions and they sign. So we'll look at all of that process. So some of the stuff we do with this vocabulary is to make it a little more high quality, is we make sure that all of it is vetted. So for our named entities, there's about a million terms we have in there. We don't just harvest those as is, we actually do a couple things with those. So the first thing we do is normalization. So this is an example of all of the ways Gaddafi was spelled in the New York Times pages. So that's a lot of spellings, and they're all correct technically, but obviously we want one canonical version of the term. We don't want there to be all of these different terms and all these different spellings, because that'd be very confusing. And also we want to disambiguate names. So because the vocabulary came from a book and was digitized, the canonical version of all of our tags is a label, text string label. So unfortunately, that means every text string needs to be unique. So we're not using like number IDs or anything like that, or URIs or something. We're using the actual label. So because of that, if we have people with the same name, we need to make sure they're properly disambiguated, both in the label and for how they suggest. So with Michael Jackson, for example, like there's multiple Michael Jacksons in the world. So the first example, the singer would get this very simple disambiguation rule of like, if you see Michael Jackson in the text and you see any of these other terms in this first or, suggest Michael Jackson, the singer. And if you see instead the terms Bush, Homeland Security, and either director or deputy director, then you want to suggest a different Michael Jackson who is someone who worked for Homeland Security. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible for the newsroom where the correct people are suggesting for them. And then we're also able to leverage with these named entities, we're able to leverage subjects with them as well. So the sports desk doesn't always want to write out the full name of every sports team in every article. So we might have something like the Giants, and we might say, if it's matching the subject baseball, suggest the San Francisco Giants, versus if it's matching the subject football, suggest the New York Giants. Our subjects get a little more tricky. So they are longer rules, they're more sophisticated rules. So this is part of the rule for airline crashes or aircraft crashes. So this is one piece, and then all the pieces would be stacked onto each other to make a full rule. So this is basically saying if in a sentence you see any one of these things from this list of aircrafts and any one of these things from this list of terrible things that could happen to aircrafts, then suggest aircraft crashes. So it might be that that's enough to suggest it, or it might be that we've stacked all of these in a minimum occurrence or an and, or any of these sort of things where you have to get multiple hits depending on the rule. So for the rules-based categorization, we're not just also looking at the entities and the subjects, we're also able to look at other pieces of metadata when we're writing rules. So we are able to do some sort of shortcuts as well. So things like, if a movie article has the byline Manola Dargis, we always know that we should suggest movies as a subject term. Or if the kicker is Hungry City and we know that's about restaurants, then we should suggest restaurants as the term. This is a peek at our CMS. So our CMS is custom and internal, and this is basically the view of what a newsroom tagger. So that could be an editor, it could be a reporter, um, basically a bunch of different folks in the newsroom who do tagging. I believe there's about 1,000 people right now who do tagging. They will see the screen, and when they get to it, it'll just have suggestions on the left side. Everything to the right is things that they assigned. So basically, for subjects, they're getting back these suggestions, and you'll see they have a score with them. That's the score of how relevant the software thinks that term is. So it's not, it's a bit of a black box because right now we're using a software that we hadn't, made internally. And it is based on the number of matches in the rule. We know that. And it is not capping at anything. So 26 isn't 26 out of 100, it's just that it's gotten 26 points. So here we can see this is an article about a woman in Saudi Arabia that's losing a custody battle for her daughter because she decided, it was decided there that she wasn't following some sort of morality laws there. And you see child custody is suggesting very high, which is good. And down here, you'll also see that there is a suggestion for yoga. And you might think that seems weird, but what we do is we actually lean more on recall and less on precision because we are having human beings who do the assigning. So yoga is actually relevant to this article in a sense because she was the first woman to open a yoga studio in that area of Saudi Arabia, or possibly ever. But it isn't super high scored because it's not the focus, and we're relying on humans to know it's not the focus. Of course, if it had a fluke where the score was high for some reason, we would also be relying on a person to know that that score is deceptive. Additionally, when taggers assign the subject terms, I mentioned they'll have scope notes for usage. So they are able to hover and look at the scope note to make sure that the term they're assigning makes sense. So this is very, very helpful for tags that are kind of close to each other, like things like cyber warfare versus cyber attacks, for example, can get tricky. So cyber warfare in our vocabulary is meant to be anything where a country is the attacker or the victim versus cyber attacks where it's just a person going against another person or a company, that sort of thing. So those are things that we make sure that are in those scope notes so that people aren't confused. So what's so special about this vocabulary? Like I said, you know, we have a lot of faith in the people tagging. And the reason we're able to do that is we do a lot of training and we make sure they really know why they're tagging something and what needs to be tagged. So all of our tags are supposed to reflect the aboutness of something. So we don't tag, brief mentions, passing references, people are quoted, things like that. We're trying to get at the meat of the story. And in training, I always say, what I want you to understand is if you were to get an alert based on this tag or search based on this tag, or have a personalized feed based on this tag, would you be excited about this result or would you be disappointed and confused by this result? And then if it's the latter, we don't want to tag that term. So that's how we're really framing it. Some of examples of like strict guidelines we have that are hard to do with something like machine learning are, if we have a crime, we would tag the crime, the victims, the suspects, but we wouldn't tag the neighbor who said they saw something or the police chief who's giving a report on the investigation. So we're able to zone in on the people and their role in the story as opposed to they're just people who appeared in the story. Same thing with something like legislation for a bill. We're not going to tag everyone quoted as giving an opinion on that legislation, but we are going to tag the people who sponsored the bill, that sort of thing. So in order to get this kind of quality control, um, basically we have this workflow. The software looks at the articles, it makes the suggestions, the newsroom selects the relevant terms. If they don't see what they're looking for, they're able to do a lookup tool in our vocabulary for subjects and some of the entities and decide like, oh, it's in there, great, I'll grab it from there. So say New York City or something very obvious didn't suggest for some reason, they're able to grab it from there. And if they don't see what they're looking for, they're able to request new terms to be added to the vocabulary. And then as taxonomists, we review term requests, we make sure the software is working correctly, and we update it when it's making bad suggestions so that everyone is getting good, uh, good suggestions. So part of that is we have these tagging guidelines and we basically have an internal tool that has guidelines for the newsroom and we have a whole section on tagging. So this was a resource that everyone gets after they go through a training session with me. They get ones based on just the basics, the FAQ, which is very in-depth and has all the information on tagging. We do it also break it down by section or desk. And additionally, we might have specialty ones. Like for now, we have like a 2020 election tagging, and we also have like coronavirus related tagging and that sort of thing. So these will show them a bunch of different information and also have all the contact information to get in touch with us for any other questions. This is an example of the term suggestions that I mentioned. So if someone is looking for something that isn't in the vocabulary, like I said, they can suggest it. That does not become metadata. What that does is it sends us the metadata suggestion. And we actually go in and look at the article, decide, first of all, would we tag this to the article? And if so, then we will add that person, organization, etc. We will write a disambiguation rule for it, and we will then add it to the vocabulary and retag the article for them. I should note that with subjects, we do get suggestions for subjects, but we are very much more strict on how many subjects we add. So We basically have a threshold for adding subjects that is if there's an immediate need in the newsroom for like an event sort of thing. So obviously like when Trump got coronavirus and there was an outbreak, we added White House coronavirus outbreak as a term because we needed that. That wasn't really a question. But something that might be starting to get trendy, we will actually hold off a little and see how many times we get a request for it, or if we, how much coverage we see for something before we consider adding it. Um, One way we do encourage them to make those requests though, because the more we see a request, we know more we know like it's something good to have. In addition to all that, they get the training up front, they're able to communicate with us and ask for things. We also communicate back with them every day. So we actually send out a daily newsletter to the newsroom and it has different parts. Standout tagging is when we give them shout outs for good tagging. We've found that this goes a long way for morale in the newsroom to not always just get negative feedback, but also get positive feedback. And we also have tagging tips. So these are things where we change the tagging. So they could have been either under tagged, they could have been over tagged, or it could be that they were missing something, but it was missing because it wasn't suggested to them. So we go in and fix the software on that term to make sure that it is suggesting properly, and we're not going to ding them for that, but we're going to let them know they did that. That term is there. And then additionally, for all those names that are requested, those entities that are requested, we do give feedback on whether they were added or not to the vocabulary. So that's a little bit about the process. It is human focused, as you can see, and there is a gatekeeper aspect to it. So this makes us pretty confident in our metadata. And because of that, we are able to leverage it for a lot of internal and external products. So some of these products, I will go through them now, but hopefully you'll be familiar with some of them if you're a New York Times reader. First one that's very simple, straightforward is collections or topics pages. So these can be different types of pages. They can be anything from um, section fronts to events, sort of like the measles outbreak or the election, that sort of thing. So on the back end, these will all have a query that is based off of the tags themselves. So this is the query for the climate section front. And it's saying, give me everything that's from the news desk climate, which is pretty obvious, or give me anything that's tagged with any of these combination of subject terms. And the reason we want to do this as opposed to just saying, give me everything everything from the climate desk is this allows us to get content from across the newsroom. So say the automobile desk is writing about electric cars, we'll be able to get that on the climate front page in a way that we wouldn't get if we just used climate desk by itself. Additionally, our tagging, it does have an SEO value in the sense that we are not tagging for SEO mainly. Like I said, we really want to get to the meat of an article, so we're not tagging like figurative language, stuff like that. But what we're doing is we're sending a vernacular version of each term to Google for news keywords. So what that looks like is an example here would be a Patient Protection Affordable Care Act. We send a vernacular of ACA, Obamacare, Affordable Care Act, a list of those things. So those will all go to Google for SEO reasons. One product we have rolled out in the last couple of years are these For You personalized channels and emails. So you can find these on your mobile app, and also you can sign up for newsletters. And these are all different channels on topics that are totally driven by queries based on those tags. So for example, if you are in our animals channel and you want to have uplifting news about animals because the world is not so great right now, what we've done is made a query that looks at all of our tags related to animals, but excludes things like hunting, animal abuse, climate change, that sort of thing. So you don't have to worry about something sad going in there. Story likes to leverage our tagging a lot. So on these kind of news event related storylines, So for this is example of school reopenings, coronavirus school reopenings. So what it does is it looks at the tags and says, if this is tagged for this one to be coronavirus reopenings and education K through 12, then pop on this navigation bar and this inline promo to other articles related to this storyline. So we have a bunch of those that happen around different topics, coronavirus stuff, elections, all of these kind of big storylines. And it's a really great resource to get get readers to explore other coverage on the same topic. Additionally, we have leveraged the tags to also save us a little money on advertising. So one we've done this is for this tool called Taffy. This was built internally and by one of our data scientists. And what it does is it looks at interest groups on social media, and then it looks at our tagging and maps those two things. So for example, if you're an interest group on Facebook for cats, and we're going to advertise to that interest group, it'll take cats on Facebook and map it to cats, the tag, and it'll show you an ad for subscribing to the New York Times that shows an article that's tagged cats because that's your interest group. And in doing this, we were able to save a lot of money because we didn't have to use an outside vendor anymore for this purpose. Additionally, our syndicate news services does also tag as well. They have a different system, but it's the same software and the same vocabulary. And the advantage of this is twofold. One, we're able to say you can get all of our content with the tags, and that is just like a bonus. And also, we're able to do these kind of customized streams of content for them. So, say we had a client that's a small newspaper in Ohio, they want to feature New York Times content, but only about Ohio news. So in that case, we're able to do things like, say, give me everything tagged Ohio, any location in Ohio, any university or company in Ohio, any sports team in Ohio, that sort of thing, and only give them that content. That's a way to give them a nice customized stream. In terms of advertising on our site, we are able to leverage the tags there a bit. So we're able to do things like if this article is about car crashes and is tagged car crashes, don't show an ad for a car on it. So let's just say all car ads shouldn't be shown on anything tagged car crashes. That's pretty obvious. Also things like, don't show cruise ads and anything about norovirus or everyone's getting sick, that sort of thing. Additionally, we are able to mark each tag individually with whether or not it is sensitive. So mostly that's used on things like terrorist attacks and mass shootings and tragedy sort of things. So it's a way to tell brands that if you don't want to be on these topics, we can say that your ads won't run anything tagged with those terms that are marked sensitive, which is a little different than, say, a tragedy tag that would take ads off an article completely. So this is a way for it to be campaign by campaign. They can decide. Um, Search internally, our site search also uses tagging pretty heavily at this point. So we weren't using it at all, and the search was not great. And then they started boosting on the Times tags and saw like a very big improvement in click-through rate. So one good example of this is I used to get the emails from people saying, I can't find anything on the New York Times site. And I would write back to them. And one person wrote in and they said, I know Bruce Lambert wrote this series on hot dogs and reviewing all the hot dog carts in New York City. I can't find any of them. I know they exist. I've seen them. I even have clips of some of them. So I did some digging, and the way we were processing keywords was making Bruce Lambert hot dogs as a search, bring up those articles on like page 40 or 50, where no one's going to go that far except me when I'm researching this. So what we were able to do is say, let's map our entities and our subjects in a way that when they're recognized in the keyword box, they will actually boost articles tagged with those things. Because the problem was, it was looking at all the words separately. It wasn't looking at Bruce Lambert as an entity. And also it was biasing recency because we're a news organization and we tend to bias recency in search. So once we decided to do that and we saw that Bruce Lambert was a person that matched a tag Lambert, comma Bruce, and hot dogs was a thing that matched the subject tag hot dogs, then we were immediately able to find all of these reviews of hot dog stands in New York City. I do not remember what era these are from, but I think they're pretty old, so I don't think this is relevant for your hot dog eating in New York today. We also have a strong use of tags in our archive. So this is a tool that is a subscriber benefit called Times Machine, and it is a basically it's a digital version of that microfilm that I was talking about. So you're able to scroll through page images and then click on articles, and you'll see in the box on the left, the index panel there, that there's some tags there, and those are original New York Times index tags because these are things prior to digitization for the most part. It only goes through 2002. And you can see that there's a number next to each tag, and that's the number of items in this issue that have that tag. So some of them could be, pretty useful, like racial integration. If you were to click on that, you'd see 14 articles on that. Obviously, things like miscellaneous section in general are not so useful, and we're not quite sure what those were used for back in the day. Unfortunately, we don't have that many people, that we're in touch with who used to work on that. But you're also able, when you're in Times Machine, to search on the tags themselves to bring up articles throughout all the issues that are in there based on those that have those tags. Just a side note that I once did a fun project for some archives tooling I was doing, where I looked up everything that we had tagged with ghosts, and I found out that the New York Times did a lot of coverage of ghosts in the late 1800s and early 1900s in a way that wasn't necessarily debunking the hauntings, and I thought that would be appropriate since we're almost at Halloween. So just something to think about. Internally, archive discovery, we use this tool internally called the search portal. And what we're able to do there is search directly on the tags themselves. So instead of doing like a keyword search in a body, we search directly on the tag. And it's a few reasons that's important. So this is a tool we do all of those queries in. So we make those queries for feeds and topics page. We use this tool. So it's a great resource. A couple things that are good about it though are if you are searching on the tag, you're going to know that a human tagged something with this as opposed to this just appeared in the body. So it's going to be a much more high level good result. Additionally, we don't have full text for our entire archive. Some of it we do, and it's okay quality. Some of it we do, and it's horrible quality. There's a lot of errors in it. So if you were to do a straight keyword search, you might miss something that even had something in the body because there might be, words broken up or symbols or typos, that sort of thing. So here, I did a search for JFK. The two different versions, his names were tagged. And I was able to find a kind of a nice treasure, which was in 1938, we tagged an article about JFK when he was just son of the ambassador to Great Britain. So this is before, he's a politician running for president, before anything. Just because we tagged this, we were able to capture this. And I wouldn't have been able to necessarily find this because we don't have full text for it. So that's pretty cool, I think. Package Mapper is an internal tool that was created by one of our data groups, and it is looking at how well things with the same tag are connected to each other. So basically, each article has on this graph has a circle, and the circle size is how much traffic it's getting, and the lines are showing that what articles are linked to each other. So you can see that some articles have a few lines going to them, so they're linked to a lot of stuff, and some do not have much going on. So that's a way of showing like articles that are related to each other based on tags and how well we're linking those articles to show that they are related to each other and show that to the readers. Internally, one tool that has been highly requested by the desks in the newsroom are Slack bots. And basically what those do is we create a query based on a need, and the Slack bot will ping the desk whenever an article matches that query. So an example of that in action was the parenting product was launched. So they were like a separate product, kind of like cooking is, if you're familiar with the Times. And they wanted to know what parenting coverage was going on with the core product. So, nytimes.com. And so we wrote them up a query that looks for everything, obviously everything tagged parenting, but also infants and babies and preschool and breastfeeding, etc. And then every time something on the core product was published about parenting, they got a ping. And then they'd be able to coordinate their coverage and product around what we were writing about or what we weren't writing about, depending if they were trying to coordinate or fill a gap in our coverage. So we have about a dozen of these running in the newsroom currently, and they're popular for both desks generally and for specific product like projects. That desk dashboards are another internal tool that is popular in the newsroom. So basically, what the newsroom desks like to do is they like to look at their coverage by topic, and then once they are group it by topic, they want to know how that kind of storyline's going. So they're going to look at the page views on that topic. So for example, like they could look at everything tagged opioids to look at the opioid crisis, and then look at the page views to see how those stories are doing, either individually or as a storyline. So that's an overview of how tags are being used today. There's still new ways we find out people want to use tags pretty regularly. They're pretty popular, which is great and keeps us pretty busy coordinating with a bunch of product teams. So that brings me to the challenges of all of this. So as I mentioned, this is a very labor-intensive process. It's a lot of human supervision, a lot of humans spending time tagging, requesting, reviewing tagging, managing the software, managing the vocabulary, that sort of thing. So we end up spending a large portion of our time uh, checking the requests from the newsroom, retagging, reading articles, making sure the tagging is good, that sort of thing. And right now, like I said, our full-time permanent staff is only 3 people, and we cover 7 days a week, 365. Pardon me. So except for Christmas, like we're here. We are working. Someone's always working. And also the newsroom is always doing a lot of work. So they're doing a lot of time training, and they're spending a lot of time on tagging, probably more than any other newsroom that I know of. And of course, with humans, you get different levels of interest, right? So some are very into tagging. Some come to me like they get hired and they're like, this is the coolest thing ever. And others, not so much. So it's a matter of like finding what they respond to. Like, are they going to respond to the fact that like if they tag better, their articles will be seen by more people? Or are they going to respond better to say, if you tag this, it'll get to this product? Or like, are they just cool with metadata and think it's a good idea to begin with? And in terms of our software, we are about to start a migration to a new, more intelligent software. So I'll point out that our current software is 16 years old. We've been using the same brand of software for 20 years, and the latest version is 16 years old and not made anymore. So we've been getting by on that, but the limitations have been that I mean, everything we're going to buy at a vendor is a black box to a degree, but it's not so easy with the one we have to like build new features on it and really like get some of the new technology. So like we are pretty committed um, to rules-based categorization. We're pretty committed to a human in the loop, but we would love to take advantage of some sort of NLP, machine learning sort of stuff that we don't have. So right now, like all of our entities are a person looking and saying, this is a person in this article and they're important, I should add them. It'd be great if we could start maybe harvesting them automatically and then like deciding what we want, something like that. Those are all things like we can't do right now. And we're also looking to get better precision and recall scores and tooling around that so we can make our rules even better. Because right now, it's a pretty ad hoc. It's like we see a rule is suggesting poorly or is not suggesting, and then we go in and fix it because we noticed it. It's not because we're looking at this big list of how all of our rules are doing. So we would love to have some sort of dashboard on that. So that's it for me. I'm happy to now get into any questions you all have. And also after this presentation, feel free to reach out as well.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. That was a really interesting talk, and it brings back lots of memories of me doing tagging and indexing and running controlled vocabularies. So thank you very much for that. We have a number of questions that have come up in the chat line. So what I'll do is I'll just name each person, and then perhaps if they unmute themselves, they can ask the question directly. So the first one is from Jeremy Tarling. In fact, he's asked 2 questions. So Jeremy, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure, thanks, David. Hi, Jennifer, and thanks for the great presentation. I have a sneaking feeling I've asked you this question before, so apologies if this is a repeat. But whenever I hear about the rules that you have at the New York Times for, you know, content classification and for entity suggestion, I'm always deeply envious because we don't really have anything like that yet at the BBC. And I wanted to ask, have the Times ever considered sharing or publishing those kinds of rules on any kind of like open license or open platform? I guess there's probably some kind of commercial investment there too, so maybe that's not a straightforward question, but yeah, I just wanted to hear what you thought about that. Thank you.
Yeah, right now the answer is no. Basically, we feel like our rules are like the thing that make it unique and that we put all this work into, and we've spent 20 years honing. So I think if that were to ever be a thing, it would have to be commercial. I don't know that we would give that away. The only thing we have done, although it's now kind of kaput, was in 2009, we did do a linked open data project where we did map our vocabulary and allow that to be publicly available, but it did not include the rules. So there were no guidelines for how things were tagged, and there were no rules for, you know, any of the rules for making the software work. It was just, this is the tag and this is, you know, what the tag sort of means. So, but yeah, I mean, I think we get that question a lot because people do want to use our stuff.
Okay, the next question was from Jonathan Engel. Do you want to ask your question, Jonathan? He's there.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can, yeah.
Okay, Jennifer, that was a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. I posted the question, I think, before you got to your final slide, but I'll just review the 2 items. One was on the rule-based system that you're moving to, is that going to be a commercial vendor or is that a proprietary system?
It is a commercial vendor. I am not positive I can say who it is because we were just signing the like literally just signing the contract. But basically what we did was he looked at about 5 solutions starting last year, and we spent the last 12 months or so looking at solutions and then narrowing it down to 2 and then doing trials with the 2 of them and spending many months doing like test runs of you know, how we could translate everything. Because one big thing is we want to gain all the functionality, but we don't want to lose 20 years of work.
Sure.
Because like I said to Jeremy, that's kind of the secret sauce for a lot of it. And we want to make sure that we have the same functionality, but plus, not that we're losing functionality. So that's been a challenge. So over the next few months, we're going to start doing the training with them and then the migration, system migration, and then we're going to start tackling the rule translation, which will be interesting. And maybe I'll have something to say about that in about a year.
Right. Good. And the second part of the question was, with this new system and your desire to employ some type of supplementary machine learning techniques, are those two approaches going to be compatible with this vendor, or is the machine learning essentially going to have to be an add-on using your huge corpus of well-tagged articles?
I think it might be a combination of both. It's seeming that we can get some of the stuff we're looking for, but we're also building some custom tools on top of things already.
Mhm.
For example, with the precision recall stuff, we are doing that internally just based on what they offered and how it looked and how it worked, and just needing some more customization. It might be similar for entity extraction. I believe the software will be able to handle at least extracting, but we'll probably want to build something, some sort of tooling to then do something with that, because we wouldn't want every entity assigned. We would kind of want it just flagged for us in some way, and possibly even like maybe a starter rule built, something like that. So that'll take some brainstorming. I think that's more a phase 2 sort of thing. That's
Right.
more once we're comfortable for a long time.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I have a question from Gitana Alemu, who's at Solent University in Southampton, and who also teaches at Dundee University and has written extensively about metadata. Unfortunately, he can't unmute at the moment, so he's asked me to ask for you. First of all, he says, thank you for a fascinating presentation. And then he says, do you allow users to do tagging?
We don't right now. So right now, the tagging in general is completely hidden from any reader of the Times, that sort of thing. Years ago, we did used to surface the tagging, and then you'd be able to sign up for products based on the tags. But now that is all in the back end, and the personalization team works with how things are customized for you. So we don't. That is something we probably wouldn't do because we have such a tightly controlled vocabulary. We wouldn't probably, and we have enough people, really. Like I said, we have 1,000 people tagging right now, which is a crazy number. It used to be 200 a few years ago.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And there's now a question from somebody who calls themselves iPad 6. I don't know if you'd like to just say who you are and ask your question.
Hi, yes, sorry, my name is Bertha Calles. And my question is about the training. Jennifer, is any online training that you would suggest to get an extra edge on how to learn, or like taxonomy, tagging experience and skills?
Yeah, so to be honest, I haven't taken online training. I got my master's in library science, and then I fell into taxonomy from being a part of the index and being an indexer. So I kind of learned on the job, but the thing I do recommend to people is they check out Heather Hedden. She has a book called The Accidental Taxonomist, which I actually have a copy of right here. She's not paying me to plug her. I just happen to have it right here. And I know that she does a lot of presentations and workshops and training and that sort of thing. So I would look to her. And she also promotes the training that other people do. So she's kind of the go-to professional taxonomist for all this sort of stuff.
Yes, thank you for that question. Also, just to alert you that we've got a series of free training programs on Thursday evenings. And if you go to the iscouk.org website, you can find details of that. And we will be having sessions on taxonomy there as well. But Heather Hedden is a very well-respected professional. And I would say, yes, she's one of the go-to people in that area. Okay, there's a question now from Leonard Will. Leonard, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, I just wondered to what extent you built the terms into a structured hierarchy. We're talking about thesauri or taxonomies, so that rather than just having broader, narrower terms, you can, for example, ask for climate and all its narrower terms as part of a search query, rather than having to enumerate a large list of possible terms that might make up that concept.
Yes, that is a good question. So right now, all of those relationships are in place. They aren't being well leveraged right now. So when you saw that query I showed for climate, one of the reasons it was so big is I wasn't able to query that way. Right now, we have an internal API that allows me to call that and see all the children. And also we can see that in our taxonomy management software, but we're not leveraging that as well as we should be right now. That is something like ticketed with our engineers. So that would be such a great time saver and such a great thing. We're hoping to go both ways. We're hoping to be able to look at everything as children and also looking at children and parents. So the syndicate that I mentioned, when they do tagging, they actually do get everything and its parents, and they take stuff off, but they tend to have more of a business reason to have the parents of each term as well. But so short answer, yes, we have it all, but are we using it? Not really, and we should be.
Okay, thank you. That's come to the end of the questions as are on the list there. I think unless there's anybody else, I've got a couple of questions of my own, but I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I think one of the issues that comes up is that about consistency and so on. If you've got 1,000 taggers, you talked a little bit about training, but how do you actually manage that whole process?
Yeah, it's not as bad as you would think. I have to say, like, for the most part, the tagging's decent. We'll have a handful of people that are kind of problem people, and usually what we'll do is go to someone who's a good tagger or a manager that might and say like, hey, this person's not taking this seriously. So sometimes we'll get kind of like these tagging evangelists in the desks, and we'll know them and we'll say like, hey, can you help us out? Because we know you were really good. And luckily we've had some of those folks too who have then climbed up in the company. Like one of our best taggers was someone who started in culture, and now he went from standards and he just got promoted again. So he's like an evangelist, and he'll have me come to talks. We do some internal series called Newsroom University, where I'll go periodically and talk to the newsroom and make sure everyone knows about all this stuff. And it's not just newsroom people, but so I'm training people directly who are tagging. We do a lot of evangelizing outside of those people too, so kind of everyone's aware of the value. So with product people, with everyone. And then it is that kind of that feedback. So what we're able to do is when I make that newsletter every day, we're basically looking at articles, checking the tagging, seeing if it's bad. If it's not great, we'll make a tip for it. We're also able to see who tagged it. So we have an internal little tool. We actually call it the tagger spy. So we're spying on who's tagging. And we're able to say like, okay, this person seems to be struggling. Let me just reach out to them individually and see what's happening. So we're able to do that. And sometimes it's someone who got moved around. They didn't have training. Sometimes it's someone who just is like a journalist who's too busy and they're not really into it. And then if that's the case, then we can say, okay, who's editing them? Can we make sure the editor is, looking at those tags then? Like we try to get all those gaps filled as much as possible, but it is an ongoing process. Like I do feel like a teacher a lot of the time.
Well, I mean, that's interesting because then kind of the word spreads. The other question which I had was about effect. You talked about the way that you index according to the aboutness of an article and so on, but then you referred later on to, we don't want to have sad stories when we're advertising, particular product or whatever, or just if somebody signed up for happy cat and dog stories or whatever. Do you index for that? How do you actually, you talked a little bit about searching, but is there a kind of tagging approach as well to it?
So right now, there is no tagging approach. That is something that has been in discussion for a while, and we were constantly talking about, and that also might be a more phase 2 or phase 3 thing as we change software. But we would like to look into both sentiment analysis and tone. So we do have a piece of metadata around tone that is not part of times tags, but unfortunately it's not, all the metadata that's not times tags is not governed in the same way. So it's not consistent. So it's not the easiest to use that tone piece. So we're not really relying on that now. So what we do for those cases, if you only want to see happy animal stories, is we'll do it at the query level. And it really just means figuring out what are the sad topics that could come up and Xing them out, basically. But one thing that came up, I think this is a good example, was there was a feed about children, and there's a story that would have gone to the feed about a refugee child that drowned, and we didn't want that there. So right now, our only solution, excuse me, our only solution was to take out drowning. But it's not a perfect solution because you could have an article that says, this is how to prevent your child from drowning. Or you could have an article that says, this child was saved from drowning. And they're completely different tones and sentiment. So that's what we're missing right now. And I think that's something as we do more products and more personalization that we'll want to do. We're just kind of finding the right way to do that once we get settled.
Right, well, thank you very much, Jennifer. You've given us a wonderful tour of the whole philosophy behind tagging at New York Times, and also just understanding the history of how you got to where you are now. I'm a subscriber, so I'm one of the beneficiaries of all the work that you do. So, you know, it's absolutely fantastic to hear that background story. I'd also like to thank the team who've been putting together this series. So Arif, Nikki, Phil, Eugene and Tara, thank you for all your work in putting together this series of meetups. We have them every month. So if you go onto the ISPO UK website, you'll see details of our forthcoming meetings. But I'd like to thank everybody for attending this evening, and particularly Jennifer for a really wonderful talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye, everybody. Have a good evening or good day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, and thank you.